morning. Welcome to our tax reform breakfast, and thank you so much, Senator Johnson, for being here. As Annie said, Senator Johnson's on the Finance Committee and is going to have a big say in the direction of tax reform, and played a very important role in the 2017 law, and we'll get into that. I did want to start off with we're in day 3 of Trump 2.0. How are you feeling about things so far that he's been doing, and what has he done that surprised you the most?
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. I guess nothing's really surprised me. We were very forewarned that he was going to be signing a lot of executive orders. I guess what did surprise and I guess amaze me is how he just held the public spotlight for the entire day of the inauguration. Pretty unusual to be signing executive orders, not necessarily in the Capitol, but then at a public event, a couple different, then back in the Oval Office. And yeah, I think that's a good thing. He's already delivering on the promises he made during the campaign. So again, none of it's really surprised me, but he certainly is entering office now in his second term, far more aware of, what, bureaucrats inside government did to undermine and sabotage his first administration. He's going to do everything he can to prevent that from happening this time.
I wanted just to do a quick rapid fire of a few of the things he's done and just get your quick reaction. The one that's been getting the most headlines over the last day was the January 6th pardons. What did you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think they were grotesque miscarriages of justice, as it relates to the January 6th defendants. Again, I always said I didn't really want to see individuals pardoned that had committed violent acts. I haven't seen all the details. There may have been some of those individuals that, again, I'm not sure they had pardons, commutation of sentences. I'd have to look at all the details. So maybe a little more sweeping than I would have wanted to see, but I certainly think there's miscarriage of justice that need to be rectified.
What about the TikTok reprieve?
I understand the argument on both sides. I'm sympathetic with both sides of the argument. I didn't vote for the bill, the funding bill that was included in. I'm not sure I would have voted for the bill to begin with. So I'm somewhat ambivalent. We have so many other threats facing this nation than TikTok. I really don't care what happens, truthfully. It's probably not what I should be saying, but I just, the way however it plays out would be fine with me.
We're all friends here. You can be candid. That's
fine. Or it'll still get me in trouble.
But one that does matter, especially for the Finance Committee, is he's already saying, tariffs are coming for China, Canada, Mexico. He wants to create an external revenue office to collect some of that revenue. What is your reaction to the direction you're seeing he's going there?
Yeah. Well, again, Scott Bessent in his confirmation hearing laid out the three rationale for the tariffs. Retaliation in one standpoint, generation of revenue, or to be used as a bargaining chip, which he used very effectively, for example, with his Remain in Mexico policy that he initiated. Mexico wasn't cooperating. He threatened him with tariffs. All of a sudden, we secured the border. So there are three rationales. One thing I've learned about President Trump is, he's a very smart guy. He's got a strategy. It's going to be not necessarily a predictable strategy, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. When I don't necessarily agree with him, I always ask myself, okay, what am I not seeing here? So again, he's well aware that I do view tariffs as a double-edged sword, especially coming from both an agricultural and a manufacturing state, with businesses being retaliated with the last round of tariffs. So he's well aware of the fact that if Wisconsin businesses, Wisconsin citizens are harmed by the tariffs, he'll hear from me about that.
Have you talked to him about it yet, since he's come back?
Not since he's become president, no.
Okay. And the last thing, he met with congressional leaders yesterday. We broke some news about how he was telling them he still thinks they should consider recess appointments if there's any slowdown in getting his nominees through. Do you think that's appropriate? Do you think the Senate should let him do that?
Well, first of all, I think number of confirmations, number of nominees needing to be confirmed by the Senate has completely gotten out of hand. I don't think that was the vision of the Founding Fathers, where you had over 1,000 individuals having to go through Senate confirmation. So what I'd love to do on a bipartisan basis is shrink that universe dramatically. We're already seeing John Radcliffe reported out of Intel Committee, I think, a vote of 14-3, and they're going to make us run the clock for 30 hours. That's not justified. And so Democrats are going to try and obstruct this, prevent President Trump from having his team in place. They do that, I think recess appointments would be totally appropriate.
Is that the consensus among Senate Republicans, or is that a divisive question? To what extent is it divisive?
I think it totally depends on how obstructionist the Democrats are. Again, if they're going to obstruct individuals that have broad bipartisan support, that's going to be a real problem.
Okay. Well, let's dive into tax reform then. As you all probably know, one of the top priorities for President Trump and congressional Republicans is to revisit the 2017 tax cuts. Some of those provisions are expiring, and there's talk about going beyond with further cuts. And you were a key player in the 2017 law. And I'm curious, as you look ahead now, given the political landscape, the thin margins in the House, to what extent do you think this is going to be harder to do than that 2017 law?
Well, first of all, let's lay out the top priority when it comes to taxes is we must avoid, and quite honestly, we got to let the American public know very early on that there will not be an automatic massive tax increase. So I'm actually for a three-step process. We can get into that, but that's the first priority. Now, I was not a big fan of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, especially as it originally came out of the House, where all they were doing is cutting tax rates for C Corps. 5% of American businesses, 95% of American businesses would have been completely hosed, made very uncompetitive against C Corps. So I'm the guy that screamed about that, dug my heels in, made sure that not only just the 80% smaller pass-throughs got a tax cut, but that all pass-throughs got a tax cut. So that was my contribution to it. Let's put it that way. But we have a horribly complex tax system. A big failure of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act is you have massive amounts of it expiring automatically in 2026. So the first step after we provide certainty that there's not going to be a tax increase is whatever we do, we need to make it permanent. I come from the business world. Stability, predictability is good for economic growth, economic activity. So let's provide the certainty that there's not going to be a tax increase, and then whatever we do with the tax code, let's make sure it's permanent. Now, what I'd like to do, I really don't like the word tax reform. I want to use the word tax simplification and rationalization. We didn't simplify the tax code last time. Now's the time to do it. So that's why I'm really suggesting a three-step process. First, the first reconciliation should provide funding for the border wall. Keep it simple. I'm strong believer in the KISS principle. Keep it simple. So first reconciliation, based on the FY 2025 budget, fund the border wall. If we need to fund defense, if there's something else that's very non-controversial that's easy to do, we can do it. Have real spending cuts to pay for that. The second one, I literally would just come in and I would just extend the TCJA as is. Don't start haggling with people, whether it's the New York folks on SALT or anything else. Just extend that for the sole purpose of providing the certainty that there's not going to be a tax increase. Then take our time and simplify and rationalize the tax code. One thing, I've got a number of ideas. There's nothing simple about simplifying the tax code. It's a complex process. That's why, I understand the desire and the political, it'd be great to have one big, beautiful bill. That's going to be very difficult to achieve. Okay, so let's do what we can do that basically has unanimous support within Republican ranks. And again, I do believe making sure there's not a tax increase is universally supported, but you have to leave all those other things out there to make sure that we actually do simplify and rationalize the tax code and take care of the proposals President Trump put forward in the campaign. Like let's not tax cash tips because you can't collect it anyway. So let's just do away with that. So there are a lot of things that make a lot of sense, but I'd like to throw it all in the hopper and start from clean slate of paper and try and simplify our tax code.
Because the debate right now, sort of the existential debate right now is, do we do one bill under budget reconciliation or two bills? And budget reconciliation is a way that congressional Republicans can pass all this without the Democrats filibustering in the Senate, right?
So I'm proposing,
so you're saying a three-step budget reconciliation.
And you can do the first two pretty fast.
How are you pitching this to your
yeah.
conference? How is that going over?
I think people understand what the rationale would be. The other thing I'm really pitching is we have to return spending levels to some reasonable pre-pandemic level. We can get into that later, but those are the top priorities. Not a massive tax increase, fund the border, and we absolutely have to bring spending down to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. So from my standpoint, those are the three things I'm pushing.
I mean, whether it's 3 bills or 1 or 2, like what are the biggest challenges you see ahead, just given the makeup of the House and Senate?
Well, again, if you make it complex, it'll be challenging. So keep it simple and have simple messaging. I think my messaging is pretty simple. First one, let's make sure we fund the border so that President Trump can deliver on that promise that is overwhelmingly popular with the American public, okay? The next goal then would be, let's make sure we don't have an automatic tax increase. We can do that. It's not that hard to do that. What's going to be difficult is now how do we literally simplify and rationalize tax? That's going to be far more complex. That is going to take time. Let's take the time. Let's not do this, slipshod. Again, I would argue the Tax Cut and Jobs Act absolutely worked. By the way, we raised more revenue. We paid for it plus $200 billion in 7 years, not 10. So I mean, that's the truth. So it worked. But again, let's focus on a really rational and simple tax system moving forward.
But don't you think Speaker Mike Johnson would say like 3 bills, really? With the Republicans I'm working with in the House? I mean, aren't you sympathetic?
Haven't been able to lay this out. Listen,
but that's a reality, right? I mean, it's really hard for him to pass 1 bill.
Well, it's going to be really hard for him to pass a big old complex one. Particularly if he doesn't have the kind of spending levels that some of us on the Senate Budget Committee are going to absolutely insist on. So, again, I'm not saying this is going to be easy across the board, but the simpler you make it, the more rational the explanations, selling the public, bringing them along, selling the president on the idea. Again, I think by keeping it simple, you make it far easier to pass.
I guess to what extent are you concerned Republicans are already falling behind because there is still this uncertainty about how many bills to do this in? Even coming out of the White House yesterday, we were hearing mixed messages about, I mean, it seems like Johnson and Thune are still not on the same page about that.
I know, they want one big massive bill to do all these things. That's going to be complex.
In the House.
Break it down into parts. Again, as Republicans, we're always talking about, why don't we have single issue bills?
Right.
Okay? Well, why don't we? We should. So that's what I'm proposing here.
Got it.
Again, I'm happy to argue with me. Colleagues, I mean, if you think this is a bad idea, tell me why this is a bad deal, why some big massive bill that's going to take months, they can get all balled up, can get stopped. I mean, let's face it, we came in last time, we did a reconciliation to repeal and replace Obamacare. How did that go? Okay, and again, I would argue that the eventual tax bill was not that great, and evidence of the fact that it wasn't that great is massive amounts of it automatically expire. All the rearranging of the deck chairs in the Titanic, they'll go back the old way if we don't do this. So let's prevent that from happening, but recognize that that's still a highly complex tax system, costs about $400 billion a year to comply with, and that's probably a lowball estimate. We always talk about this. As Republicans, we always talk about simplifying the tax code. Why don't we actually do it? So, I got in the Senate Finance to have this input at this moment. And that's what I'm trying to tell my colleagues on the Senate Finance Committee is, let's be inspired by this. Let's take this opportunity. But we've got to get these other things out of the way first, then we can really take our time. And listen, there's going to be a lot of compromises. As I said, there's nothing simple about simplifying our tax code.
So when you get to that third bill, in your vision, can you help us understand, like, what do you see as the fault lines there that Republicans are really going to have to resolve internally?
So first of all, let me talk about how we start this, sure. Okay? Again, I come from the business world. People from the private sector, particularly in business, you would not believe how unprofessional, and pardon my French, half-assed Congress is and our approach to these things. All of a sudden, there's this multi-thousand-page bill that nobody's ever seen, nobody's had input into. It's pretty well divorced from reality. So again, what I'm trying to do on the spending side is I'm forcing everybody to actually know what we spend in total in the federal government. A quick little story. 3 years ago, and this will relate to taxes too. 3 years ago, we were debating one of the omnibuses. All of a sudden, Republicans were abandoning our principle that we weren't going to support earmarks. So I stood up in the Republican conference and just asked my colleagues, anybody know how much we spent last year? If anybody knew, they didn't raise their hand and volunteer the answer. I went out to the Washington Press Corps, asked them the same question. And some reporter said, well, it's like over $1 trillion. No, that's just discretionary spending. That's 28% of our budget. I mean, anybody, total spending. Nobody knew it. By the way, I granted them immediate absolution because we never talk about it. We never discuss it. We're the largest financial entity in the world, and literally we don't know how much the federal government spends. So let me tell you the figure. 2019, we spent $4.4 trillion. COVID happened, massive spending spree. We spent almost $6.6 trillion. So you would think, by the way, once the pandemic ended, just like if you're a family and you have an illness and you have massive medical bills, if you get well, you don't keep spending at that level, right? But we did, as the federal government. The last 5 years, we've averaged $6.5 trillion. Last year, we spent about 6.9. It's completely unsustainable, but part of the reason is because nobody knows or focuses on total spending. Same thing's true of taxes. Everybody talks about these scores from CBO or Joint Committee on Taxation, but they're wrong. Again, they scored the original Tax Cut and Jobs Act is reducing the deficit or increasing the deficit by $1.5 trillion. In 7 years, we beat that plus $200 billion, and that was with the COVID recession. So quit relying on those estimates and focus on a simple tax system, which starts with recognizing where we get the revenue from, and also how we spend through the tax code. I don't think very many people realize that tax expenditures are about $1.7 trillion. In 2024, they were 6% of our GDP. If you want a metric to tell you how complex your tax system is, take a look at your top marginal rate compared to the effective rate, and that delta tells you you've got a really complex tax system. So what we ought to focus on is eliminate expenditures. You could dramatically lower the rates and simplify your system. Now again, I'm not saying that's going to be easy, but you focus on those types of metrics to guide your efforts so that you do your tax simplification based on principles, not based on lobbying groups. You got to retain this deduction or that deduction. But again, I had my staff print out the tax expenditures. I should have brought the piece. It's pages and pages. Almost $1.7 trillion worth of all these special little deductions, credits, that kind of stuff. Overall principle, stop trying to socially and economically engineer through the tax code. We do a terrible job. Have a simple tax system, raise the revenue you need, and do no economic or social harm.
Do you think the 2017 law went too far in cutting corporate taxes?
Well, personally, I would eliminate the corporate tax. I would tax all business income at the ownership level. So I'd be a corporate rate of 0. But now we would be taxing all corporate income at the ownership level, the individual tax code using progressive rates. That actually would be a revenue raiser, okay? But free corporations from all this complexity of the tax code. But if you take a look at where we were in terms of OECD average versus our effective rate on corporations, we were pretty competitive back in 2017. Now, we had some real problems in terms of offshore income being parked offshore because we made it very unattractive for people to bring those earnings home. So we definitely had to fix things. And in general, I'm always for returning more of people's hard-earned money, whether it's business income or personal income, to those taxpayers. It always works, and it did work. But we lowered the effective rate. So back then, these are JCT numbers. The effective rate for both large and small corporations were 21.8%, which is pretty close to the OECD average back then. Now, according to JCT, large corporations have an effective rate of 10.8%, large corporations 14.8%. So we can't even screw that up. We made a differential between the large guys and the small guys. And of course, pass-throughs are up in the 20%, and they're going to get really hosed if the tax cuts expire. So again, I think you make the argument, again, I would eliminate the corporate tax and tax all business income at the ownership level like we do with 95% of American businesses. That'd be my solution. I'm not sure anything that radical can pass, but there are all kinds of benefits to doing so. But that's why, again, I want to put this all in the hopper. I want to discuss tax simplification using basic principles like wherewithal to pay. I mean, I would go to a or a cash-based income system. There are all kinds of benefits to doing so, but people have to, embrace out-of-the-box paradigm-shifting thinking.
And in 2017, your priority was this pass-through deduction.
Because
And pass-throughs can be large and small businesses.
Sure.
Do you? And I think the deduction is around 20% now. I mean, do you think that should be revisited, increased, and how do you pay for that?
First of all, I wasn't on finance. I didn't write the bill when the first bill came out of the House. I honestly couldn't believe it. It's like, ooh, you're only cutting taxes for 5% of American businesses. What about all the other businesses? And so, I started screaming about that. We immediately took care of the 80% of smaller pass-throughs, and I had to really dig my heels in the last 20%. It's not the way I would have done it. I mean, deduct 20% of income, and then, in order to get me to agree to pass the bill, also had to lower the top rate from 39.6 to 37 because I wanted the top pass-through rate under 30%. So, but we cobbled together, again, a complex system. I mean, again, I want simplification. So that's why I want to take time, start from a clean sheet of paper. I mean, listen, Mike Crapo's doing a great job as chair. He's been, we've been talking about this stuff. We've been getting scores, but, we'll get these big, long spreadsheets, multi-pages, just mind-numbingly complex. And my input is always to turn it over and go, hey, guys, let's start from a clean sheet of paper here. That's what I'm trying to engineer.
But are you holding your fire on specifics, or do you want to see more
listen,
on pass-through?
I
just want to hear more specific ideas.
Yeah, well, again, my most specific proposal is what I was proposing back in 2017. I called it a true Warren Buffett tax because it would be. But again, that's just on the business side of things. What to do with individuals. However we simplify and rationalize, if we base it on principles, and one of the first principles would be stop trying to socially and economically engineer through the tax code. Again, which is not that smart. Keep it simple. Lower that delta between top marginal rates and the effective rates. So again, I'm open. I mean, there's so many different proposals. I mean, Trump if he puts on a across-the-board 20% tariff, theoretically, you can maybe raise $1 trillion in revenue. That's a pretty simple tax if you look at it that way. Again, I hate to have that plus income tax. And again, but there's consumption taxes. There's all kinds of proposals out there: flat tax, fair tax. Let's look at all of them. But if you're going to take a look at all of them, let's take our time and really evaluate them carefully.
Who is really driving this discussion on Capitol Hill right now? Is it Jason Smith? He's the one I read most about with the big ideas, who's going down to Mar-a-Lago, and who's...
Well, you probably have different people driving it.
Yeah.
I'm certainly driving it here today.
What are Senate finance Republicans doing right now to prepare?
Well, again, Chairman Crapo has done a great job for months. We've been laying out, getting the scores on, what does it cost to, extend the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. The best idea that he and his staff have come up with is, first of all, let's equalize the treatment of spending and taxes. Right now, if you've got a spending program that expires, if you want to extend that, it has no score, because you pass a budget based on current policy, and so you just extend that. There's no score to continuing spending programs. If, however, a tax cut expires and you want to extend it, now there's some massive score. By the way, and it's a BS score too. Tax Cut and Jobs Act was $1.5 trillion score. Now, and the corporate tax is permanent. So the other portion of that, now they're saying is going to cost $4.6 trillion. I mean, the whole thing costs, scored at 1.5. If you just inflate that using CPI, it'd be about $2 trillion. Where are they getting 4.6? So again, I would ignore those scores. And focus on a simple system.
So there's this debate about current policy baseline versus current law baseline.
Yeah.
That's what you're getting into. So do you think?
Let me finish that off. So what we should be doing then, and when we pass a budget in Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee rules this, we need to determine how we set the budget. We should set it based on current policy.
And that means
If we set it on current policy, we can have Senate Finance pass the extension of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and there's no score.
right. It means you don't have to pay for the $4 trillion. That's just extending.
So there you go, bingo.
And you think that's the way it should be?
Yeah, that'd be my second reconciliation. Just pass that budget, instructions to the Senate Finance Committee. You can have to go vote-a-ram, all that kind of crap, but, you know, it's just that simple. There's no score. Now, if that doesn't pass muster with the Senate parliamentarian, okay, now we're going to have to extend it, and we're going to have to do the budget cuts that I'm proposing using, use Bill Clinton's 1998, use Obama's 2014, or using President Trump's 2025 budget, those figures. Inflate these things for population, inflation, slot in today's Social Security, Medicare, and interest. We'd be looking at spending somewhere between 5.5 and 6 versus our current $7 trillion. That's on the spending side, and I see we're running out of time.
So what is your best estimate of when all this gets done?
Well, again, if we do the three-part step, we could do that in a couple months.
A couple months?
Yeah.
3 bills?
No, I mean the first 2.
Oh, okay, wow.
If you use the 3-step process, you do the first 2 in a couple months, and then we can take our time on the third. Obviously, we'd have to do it while we know we control both houses of Congress.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here and taking the questions.